This is my son's dresser that I'm working on refinishing, but the dresser's actually not the point. The point is, this is my son's Snakey, named HJ. Oh my gosh, HJ isn't usually awake for me. And recently got a bigger cage, but something I didn't think about is this cage is actually a little bit too heavy for this dresser. It's actually done some damage that I can fix. Also, to finish refinishing this dresser, I need to take the cage off. But I want something else for it to sit on. See if HJ will say hi. Hi! And for this build, I've decided what I need is a stand. So I'm going to build a stand that's going to go here, and I'm going to go around it for the cage to sit on top of, instead of putting all the weight on the dresser. So, that's the plan. Hello and welcome back to What Heather Did. I am Heather and I like to do things, and today what I'm doing is participating in a furniture flipping pet challenge and taking or creating something pet inspired, so something for a pet. And it's hosted by the Crafty Creech DIYs and Furniture Flips and co-hosted by Color Caboose Creations. Be sure to check out the playlist down below to watch all of the videos in the challenge, because there are some amazing flips. And today's flip for me, I had a lot of ideas, but what I decided on was out of need that we needed a shelf for my son's snake cage to sit on. And a lot of other stuff would have been fun, but I wanted to create this. And the idea was to create something, you know, it's snake inspired, a little bit rough, not perfect, and just have fun with it and create something for it to sit on. So stick around and see what I did. I decided to make this shelf out of 2x4s because they're cheap, readily available, and can take quite a beating, which is a good thing for, you know, boys' room. So it was for 2x4s. I just cut, I'm just doing rough cuts right now. It's not the final length, but from each board I got one leg and then one of the boards to go across, and saved a lot of wood if you kind of plan out how your cuts and how you can make it fit. And I start with rough cuts, that way I can just get the boards I need, do what I need to do with them, and then I can come back later. Notice my sacrificial board that I used for cutting on. This supports my cut all the way through, and I get pretty smooth ends. I did decide to take my 2x4s to my table saw to rip the edges off. And the reason I did this is because the edges of the 2x4s are curved. So when you stick them together, like I'm going to be doing on this particular shelf, like this, you can just see you have a little bit of a gap there. Also, when you get 2x4s out of the stack, sometimes the edges are just kind of busted, so this helps just clean that up a little bit. I'm not going to show you everything for ripping down a board because I don't think I'm the best one for teaching, but this is my table saw. It was given to me. It is quite old, and I do a lot of planning for my cuts. This is really important. You want to spend a lot more time planning and kind of setting up your cut. That way you'll get a nice cut. Also, my fence doesn't square itself, so I have to square it before locking it down. I go through, here's what I'm going to hold this down. I have get my blade to the right height. I'm standing off to the side. Like, there's a lot of planning that goes into this. I skipped how I actually ripped it because, again, if you don't know how, you should watch another video that actually teaches you. And then what I did was just cut one side off of each of them, measure, get the final board width here, and then I run them through again to make sure I have the right width for the final boards. Then I sanded. This is 80 grit. Obviously this is sped up I'm not worrying about making sure these are perfect. The idea is just to get them sanded. And after doing all that, I realized I never actually cut the cross pieces. To save on wood, I'm using some scraps here. I'm using my cut 2x4s to get the width the same on these 2x6s that I'm using. So use that as a little guide for how thick the board should be, and then cut 4 of these out of 2x6s. And I still have scraps. It's amazing. After everything was sanded, it had been ripped down, all the stuff, I'm cutting to the final length. So I've marked my board, have it clamped down, sacrificial board. I use this just to support my table saw, my circular saw to get a straight cut. But here is where I messed up. I wasn't thinking about this and I made a mistake. Because this wasn't supported and I didn't really pay attention, watch right here how it kind of dips. See that? It's not a huge deal, but it does make a little bit of a not straight cut. So what you can do to avoid that is, if you're making a small cut on the circular saw, is to put a little board there to support the other side of your saw. And yes, I could have used my table saw, but it has some issues and it needed some maintenance, and I just wasn't in the mood for that right now. So I was just using this to make my final cuts, which is fine for what I'm doing here. And I don't have a miter saw, so it is what it is. We do the best we can with what we have. And notice here, when I make this cut, my saw is supported throughout the cut, and I get a very nice straight cut. And I remove the factory ends, just like you should. And I clean as I go. There's a lot of sawdust. Just clean it up as you go. It's easier. I am going to assemble this with pocket holes because they're quick and easy and it'll work perfect. And I'm going to drop stuff. This is an older pocket hole jig, but it's worked well. And the reason it's still in the box is because I don't have a lot of space for storage. So keeping it in the box means that everything's always together and it's easy to store on my little mobile workbench. Make sure to set the depths for everything on pocket holes for the piece you're screwing into. You want to consider the width of the piece you're screwing into, not the one you're going through. So just a lesson I learned, so I'm sharing it with you so you don't have to learn the same lesson. Get everything hooked up. Look at my pieces, decide which side is the pocket hole's going to go into, so it's the side you wouldn't really see as much. Label it so I don't forget. And then start drilling my pocket holes. And I do have my vacuum hose attached. It helps get nice pocket holes and everything, just it goes much smoother. And I did this for all the boards that needed to be attached. Easy peasy. And these are the pieces that used to be 2x6s. See, you can rip 2x6s down to the right width to be like a 2x4 like I wanted. After I put the pocket holes in, I sanded with 120 grit. I use these little sand nets. Which actually come with a special backing to attach to your sander. And I didn't actually put that on this one at first. And then discovered it because the sandpaper almost went flying off. So you fix it. And just go through, sand everything, because I did 80, now 120. I'm actually not going any higher than 120 because, again, it's the look I'm going for. I don't want perfection. I want it to look a little bit rough because it's going to get beat up anyway. And this is real speed. This is definitely how you sand. Wouldn't it be great if it actually went that fast? Hours of sanding in 30 seconds. And you can use pencil marks to help you keep up with where you have and haven't sanded. But again, wasn't that worried about it. And it's a 2x4, so there's not a lot of space covered. To attach the legs, especially on the end grain here, I put glue. Or build the legs, not attach the legs. I put glue, let it dry, and then added more glue. It's on the end grain. The end grain is going to absorb a lot of glue. I don't know that it's really that big of a deal because, again, pocket holes are pretty strong on their own. But keeping everything square here. And clamps are helpful. I should have had more clamps here than I did. I don't know why I didn't, but whatever. And just screw those together. And repeat. It would have been easier if I'd put the second cross piece on and then added the other side of the leg, but I didn't do that. This is what I did. And sometimes you just afterwards go, would have made more sense if I'd done this. Also with pocket holes is really important. This board's just a little spacer. With pocket holes, it's really important to stop whenever it's like, don't try to keep tightening it because you'll force it. You can damage the wood, force it through, and just mess it up. So don't keep doing that. You're just screwing until it's tight. Using my square to make sure everything's square. Also notice everything's bright orange because I can't find anything ever. It can be laying right in front of me and I won't see it. So bright orange helps me find stuff. That's not just me, right? Check, make sure everything's square. Use my spacer board to make sure the other one's where it should be as well. Because the boards do start to warp a little bit, this just kind of helped hold it where I needed it to be while I screwed it in place. Screwed it in place, just to be clear. And after I had both legs assembled, I started putting the whole thing together. That's one of the legs. You can see the other one sitting over there. Decide which board I want where. Look at all of them, put a little spell on them. And then start putting them together. Same thing I've done before. Wood glue on the end, let it dry, more wood glue. And this time I had sense to get clamps. You know, whatever. Make sure everything's where I need it to be. And screw it together. You might notice the board on the back is not lying flat like the one on the front is. And this is because the dresser's going to slide in there. So that's, you know, there to like, here's where the dresser will slide to. That's what I decided to do. So square it up, make sure everything's good, and then attach the other leg, which boards are warped. They don't quite come together where they should. Clamps just kind of pull it back together. You can see this one kind of sticking out there, and it still ended up square. So it worked out okay. Clamps are helpful. Use clamps. I'm using this little spacer to help hold, I'm using a second spacer, to help hold this board that's going to go across. And then, see, I get it all in place and realize it was backwards, so turn it over. Also notice in the background, on the right, you can see my daughter back there. She's in her painting office. We created a little painting office for her in there. So, clamping everything, plenty of glue, and screw that piece in as well. And this is just on the back to help prevent the back and forth wobble. I'm going over the edges here with 120 grit. Notice I also did it on the feet. Just curve those over. I'm helping just knock those sharp edges down. I know I put those sharp edges there, but just make sure nobody gets injured. And on the bottom to help prevent splitting. And here's my final piece, all assembled. Yay! And here's my stain that I'm using. I found this. I was like, oh my gosh, it's the perfect color. And if you're like, wouldn't it have been easier to stain it before you put it together? Yes. Yes, it would have. And I entirely meant to. But I got really into the building part and forgot I should make lists, because that's how that went. It is much more of a pain to stain when it's all assembled, but whatever. So I just took a foam brush. Pine is really porous, and I did not use a pre-stain conditioner. Pine is really porous, so it was absorbing this water-based stain to the point that really when I went to like wipe away, there wasn't anything to wipe away. So I went over the whole thing. Everything got one coat, and then I decided I wanted a little bit darker, so the outside pieces where you'd actually see got a second coat. And here's when it was finished. Loved this color. The water-based stain was very easy to apply, and bonus, I could do this inside, which was great because it was 100 and something degrees outside. Here's me making the texture. I mixed up paint, and I found this recipe, and I was like, I'm going to try that because this is going in my son's room, so if it's a terrible idea, you know, it's fine. So it's the paint and then 2-to-1 baking soda and white school glue. So I just mixed that up and made like a mud-like consistency, thinner consistency, add more glue, thicker consistency, less glue. And I decided to give this a try. I have these snake skin pattern stencils that I bought off of Amazon. And I was going to use the edge of the stencil to make this easy, but my son really liked the center. So this is me trying it out to see how it worked. I'm just using a flat card. It's not a credit card. You don't have to try to find the number. And then just smoothed it over, kind of pressed it into the space. And made it nice and thin. Yeah, I want it to stick out a little bit, but not so much that it's really high. So, but again, it's okay if it's a little bit rough. Man, it was perfect. This is the back. It's just a little test spot. Really liked it. Wiped off some of the excess they got on there and kept going. I did have to do the rest of it kind of vertically, which was a little bit harder, but it was okay. It was easy to apply. I had some problems that I ran into, like I couldn't tape it all down. It was just, there were struggles. It was okay. I liked it. There are a few gaps trying to line this up, but for what I was doing with it, I'm pretty happy with it. It would have been nice if I had gotten to use the edge of the stencil, but it's alright. So on the front of the piece, my son wanted this stencil instead of the edge of the other stencil, which is fine. The edge would have been much easier. Obviously, could have taped it down, but you know, you give the client what the client wants. And I did have some struggles with it, kind of the mud kind of clogging up the little holes. Just wipe the back off. It's sliding a little bit or getting too much underneath it, but I figured it actually looks really good and I like the way it went, so it's all good. Now, to add a little bit of contrast, I did some dry brushing. So you get a little bit of paint on your brush. Wipe most of the paint off. And then brush the almost dry paintbrush over your piece. Super simple. The important part is to wipe off most of the paint, so it's just kind of highlighting. I did decide I wanted a little bit more of the whiter colors to get some contrast, so I went back and added a little bit more. So still dry brushing, but I just kind of layered until I got the look that I wanted. And once I was happy with that look, I let it dry. Then took a fine grit sanding sponge and went and sanded down. Hit the edges to make sure there's no rough parts, sanded down a little bit. This also brought out a little bit more of the color of the actual texture in some spots. So it added that little bit more depth to it. I just went over all those spots, make sure got the pokey parts off and it was smooth-ish. It's not gonna be smooth because it's textured. After you do that, you have to figure out a way to get all the sand or the dust off. So I just took an old paintbrush and brushed all of that off because I don't have an air compressor to blow the dust off. This worked really well. Do not take a damp cloth. Don't ask me how I know that. To top coat, I'm using this polyacrylic, water-based polyacrylic in satin. I'm going to be spraying it because, you know, brushing it would be kind of hard with the texture. But I have to work inside because it's in the garage. I don't really have a great space in the garage for spraying. But it's too windy outside to spray. Stir this well. Do not shake. Do not shake this. Just stir it well. And after you stir well, I'm going to put it into my paint sprayer, which is like a home right paint sprayer. It's not a very fancy one, but it does what I need. And you want to strain anything you're putting through a paint sprayer, strain it. Even if you think you don't need to, do it anyway. Because it's way better to strain it and not have needed to strain it than to clog up your sprayer. For my particular sprayer, you do have to coat the edge in like petroleum jelly before you put it together. You will not get a smooth spray if you do not do that. And then once I have that done, just put it all together and get ready to spray. And make sure you adjust the nozzle, do a test spray, all the things before actually spraying it. Like adjust this, turn the nozzle the direction you're going to need it, all the things. After doing my test sprays and making sure everything looks good, I started spraying. And I did 2 coats like on the underside and the back pieces and 3 or 4 coats on everything else. I think 4 because of the texture. And just a very light sand in between coats to get down any dust nibs, recoat, and then let it dry really well. It's really all you have to do. This is the damage I found on the top after we moved it. So it was worse than I thought. And so I'm actually glad I did this. Here is this in his room. It doesn't look level, but I promise it is. I don't know what that is. But there it is. And I love it. I think it looks awesome. And my son was a little bit concerned that it wouldn't be able to hold the snake cage. So I told him he could climb on top. It does sag a little bit in the center under his weight, but it will hold the snake cage. Okay, it's on there. And then he tried to convince me that the snake cage was heavier than he was, so he wasn't a good test. I think it's good. And my son wanted to make sure we got a shot of HJ going back in the cage. Definitely notices a difference. Very excited about the new shelf that the cage rests on. I'd love to get your thoughts on the build. What are some things you would have done differently? Unless you're going to knock on pocket holes, then whatever. I will let you know how the texture holds up. Do you have a different texture recipe? I'd love to know. There were some... I'm not sure about how, getting the stencils together. Oh, I got my finger out of the way. But overall, I'm happy with it. The dresser fits under there. I don't know why I left that empty space there. I think I'm going to build a shelf now. I don't know. But let me know. What do you think I should do with that down below? Love to hear your thoughts. And
if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe.
And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Actually, I won't see you, but you get the idea.